What harms our friendship with God? Well, James is the first letter of the church. It explains to believers that we have two choices. Now remember, James knew all this. He was Christ's earthly brother. He knew all this stuff that Jesus had said to the disciples. And the book of James is James applying it to the early church. He's the first one that took Christ's message of his ministry and applied it to the local church because he pastored Jerusalem, the first church. And so he says every day you have a choice to become a friend of God or a friend of the world. And these choices are mutually exclusive. Jesus already said you can't have two that dictate the direction of your life, that are mastering you. So James enlarges the truth by explaining whichever friend is allowed intimate, close access into our life, into our desires, into our time, into our direction, is the one that's our friend. So you see, that's where believers go from this unbelievable friendship with God to kind of feeling really distant from Him. Has God moved? No. What's moved? The little incremental choices that they haven't maintained the choices of friendship with God, and instead they have befriended the world. Real quickly, it isn't who we say is our friend, it's who we allow to shape our life. Either we're like Abraham, who is a friend of God by the choices he made, or when we befriend the world, then we are acting like we're not God's friends or we're His enemy. The simple test is whether we love the Lord enough to keep His commands. Friendship is explained in James, and now in James chapter 4, and I'm going to end there. If you want to turn there, I want to circle a few words, but I'll also put them on the screen. But I'm going to end with this simple definition of what James says. First, he says adulterers and adulteresses. Actually, the text doesn't have the adulterer in there. It's all adulteress, because it comes from the Old Testament that Israel was married to the Lord, and their affection should only be for Him. And if their affections were lavish, not on their husband, the Lord, but on some other suitor, they were like an adulteress. And so James pulls that in. And he says, don't you know that friendship, giving the same intimacy that should only be for the one you love to the world, puts you at enmity with God? Now, real quickly, the question is, what's the world? I mean, that's a big question. Well, cosmos, the world, does not refer to the physical earth or universe. I always remember one Puritan writer said this, and I'm not against anything the Puritans say, but it was interesting. What he said is, he was walking down, in his journals, he said he was walking down the road with his friend, and the friend said, oh, how beautiful are the flowers. And the Puritan said, I have found that I cannot call anything on earth beautiful apart from Christ. And I thought, well, that's a wonderful attitude, and it's true, but the Bible isn't saying that there's nothing beautiful in the world. What it's saying is, it's not referring to the physical earth and saying that you can't like anything on earth or the universe. It's the spiritual reality of the man-centered, Satan-directed system of this age. All of that is hostile to God. Think about that. And if it's hostile to God, and we're God's friends, and we are engaged to be married to Him, we as His friends become hostile, that it's hostile to us too. In other words, if someone is an enemy of my wife, then they are my enemy too. If they're harming her, they're harming me. If you understand what I mean, we're connected. And God says, you're connected to me. This world refers to the self-centered, godless value system and desires of fallen mankind. This is what the Lord says. The goal of the world is self-glory, self-fulfillment, self-indulgence, self-satisfaction, every form of self-serving, and all of that all that self stuff is hostility toward God. And God says, when my friends back away from their loyalty of friendship to me and start befriending this self-glory, self-fulfillment, self-indulgence, self-satisfaction, He says they lose the closeness they could have with me. God's defined the pathway of friendship. Genuine saving faith provides the power of grace so every believer can make the choice of obedience. The problem is not whether or not we can obey God's commands, it's whether or not we as born-again believers want to do so. That's the tension each of us go through every day. It's the little choices we make. The power is there, is do we want to deny ungodliness? Do we want to mortify our desires? In Luke 6, Jesus said, don't call me Lord if you don't do what I say. In John 8, Jesus said, if you abide in my word, you're truly the ones that are following me. We already read John 14:21. If you love me, you'll keep what I tell you to do. John 15:14 says, you're my friends if you do what I command you. What did God see in Abraham that showed him this friendship? Some tips from Abraham. The scene when the two angels visited, look at the behavior of this 100-year-old Abraham. Note what he does. He interrupts his plans because God showed up. He warmly greets the strangers. He does everything he can to show them kindness. He invites them to a special meal. The whole chapter 18, the first half, is full of movement. Abraham, he's almost 100 years old. He's running, hastening. He's telling everybody around him to do everything they can. And he even calls himself a servant twice. He acts like a servant. In fact, he doesn't even sit down at the meal with the Lord. He stands there saying, anything else I can do? You want a little more coffee? Can I help you? I mean, it's just, wow. Then the scene changes in the second half. And Abraham is invited to a special conference. And God says, should I hide my plans? And the answer is no. And God starts talking to Abraham as his friend. It's amazing to think about. It's a picture of what Christ said in John 15. We love him and he loves us. We're both servants, like the first half of Genesis 18. We're friends, like the second half. But Christ treats us as friends if we do what he commands. And that's why Abraham was God's friend. Though imperfectly and though not constantly, Abraham was set on God's way. If we have friendship with the world, we experience opposition from God. Lot in Sodom isn't called God's friend. In John 14:16, Jesus reminds the disciples they had this privileged position only because of his grace. He said, you didn't pick me, I picked you. But because I picked you, and if you love me, I want you to respond this way. As branches, we share Christ's life and fruit. As friends, we share his love and bear fruit. As branches, we're pruned. As friends, we're instructed by the Son, and his word controls our lives. The greatest privilege in life is being God's friend and learning to know God better and better. Each of us can be as close to God as we choose to be. Since you and I can be God's friend, we should ask for his grace to keep us near the throne. Allow his Spirit to help us listen to his word, to express often our desire to enjoy closeness with him and say, I want to obey you. Help my unbelief. Forgive and cleanse all the times and wash that away, because my heart's desire is to know and love you.